Hello, everybody, and this is Petra Lohmeyer from Nevelle. This is the Win-Win podcast, and we are super excited this week because we are going to be in Frankfurt at the book fair with our book back here. So you need a new job, and now, of course, you're asking, what on earth does a book about jobs have to do with win-win situations? Well, we did change management in big corporations for a long time, and we noticed that even though sometimes changes were really, really important for the company, were actually absolutely vital for the company, vital for the department to survive, people were so afraid of change that they would sabotage it. And that was a real problem, and we see that again and again. And we thought, okay, how are we going to help? The time we actually help people get new jobs, we help people deal with the change, but we are not always there. So we thought, okay, we've got a lot of experience collectively with change and with different changes that came from the outside, not changes that we actually wanted at the time. We found some techniques that are incredibly helpful. And in some countries, these techniques are already known. In other countries, they are not. In some stratas of society, they're already known. People use them all the time. In other stratas, they are not known at all. And we wanted to show some kind of out of the box techniques to people that they can use because we've seen very different environments. And the weird thing, that's the thing about cross pollination. And Jay Abraham, the absolute genius in marketing, says that as well. A lot of times people are doing something in one area, one job, for example, in marketing in his case, but they are in a different industry. They're not doing that at all. They're doing something completely different. So if you take one technique from one area to the next area, it is complete innovation, and suddenly breakthroughs happen. And we saw that as well, that from different jobs, things that are in different jobs completely normal, you take it to a new job and it creates a complete breakthrough. So some of these techniques come from different areas, and we found them incredibly helpful to not only find a new job or find a new area of passion to go into, but also how to work ourselves into. And there are also some really good tips in that area because there's a lot of change coming with AI, with quantum computing now, with digitization and with globalization. Maybe not so globalization in some areas. So it is really important to become adaptable. And that is, by the way, what Darwin said. He didn't say that the strongest survive, he said the most adaptable survive. You know, take a look at the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs are dead, but the little chameleon is still alive, and they're coming from the same area. So this is what the book is about, and we will be in Frankfurt in Hall D, I believe, 29 or I'm gonna have to take a look again. I'll put it. I post it here in the video as well, and I would love to see you there. But today we are about soil, and that sounds like really boring, right? But do you remember Sadhguru with his Safe Soil campaign?
Remember the Save Soil dance? We actually wanted to ask Sadhguru whether we can use it because I was a volunteer back then, and it would emotionally anchor people to saving the soil and to that movement back then. You may remember it was Sadhguru's campaign. He traveled to various countries, spoke to country leaders about the state of the soil, also spoke in Davos and the World Economic Forum, and his daughter gave dance performances as a part of these events in India, which also inspire us, of course.
Here are a few pictures of that, or a little video in the background. Wasn't that kind of exciting? I thought it was kind of exciting. Mm. He did that about 3 years ago, and talked to various people in various different governments, talked to in the World Economic Forum at Davos as well. And now actually people have taken note. The UN, we are going to take a look at one of the posts that they put out just recently. And why is it important? Well, since we are in Frankfurt from tomorrow on, now I didn't really have time to completely translate all of that. I'll have to take a look if I can find that until in the edit later. But it is, of course, for if you want a lot of crop, you're going to have good soil for it, because otherwise the crop isn't going to grow. Even if you grow crop in it, the food, the vitamin content and the content of the what you need from the food isn't going to be in there if the soil itself isn't good. You're going to find, and that is one of the things that people found, is that a lot of the vitamin content has gone down. Riboflavin has gone down by almost 40%. Vitamin C content has gone down by 15%, at least here in Europe, and maybe more in other areas. So, and what is the consequence of that? Well, if there's the nutrient content has gone down, you need to eat more in order to get the same nutrient content that your body needs. And if that food still has the same calories, you're going to eat more food, which means you're going to get fat. So that's a lot of times when people do are overweight, the reason is because they're taking in food that has very little nutritional content, and the body needs that nutritional content. So that is one of the things. And of course, you can also get sick if you don't get the right vitamins. Resilience and security. So good soil means that not only the plants themselves are going to be more resilient against all kinds of things, but it's also global security, because if people don't have anything to eat anymore, they're going to move somewhere where there is something to eat, obviously. So you're going to have migration, you may have wars. It's also about climate change, because good soil that is rich in biological content, and biological content, that means all these little worms and little creatures and stuff that are in the soil that a lot of people think are bad, or are are trying to kill. Those are the things that are actually making you live. Take a look at this. This is the difference between soil with biological content, meaning all these little animals in it, and that is the soil. What happens to the soil on the left hand side when you don't have that? And you see that all that happens is that it gets moldy. It doesn't translate into soil, at least not in the same speed. It takes a lot longer. I don't know if it even has the same nutritional content later that the plants then can use. So we need these little creatures in there, and good soil again is a carbon sink. If the soil isn't that good anymore, it cannot bind as much carbon. Biodiversity also is dependent on good soil, and good farming, for example, is dependent on good soil, obviously. Yeah. Otherwise, you don't get good crops, you don't get the yield that you want to get, right? So, how good how good is the soil at the moment? Well, here in Germany, again, we talked about the food content, but we still have 2 to 6% of organic substance would be great if you have it, but we only have 2 to 3%, and we are one of the best ones worldwide. There is a lot less in Asia. Surprisingly, in America, they already have some really good policies in place, apparently, at least in some areas. Although you don't hear that at the moment, but that is good news. But in Asia, it's a really not a um, good thing at the moment, which is, of course, why Sadhguru is the one, from India. In India, the situation of the soil isn't great, and he saw that 20 years ago already. That is how Kavri calling. I don't know how you pronounce it, but that is how he put his initiative in place, because he is a guru in India, and the people around him were dying because farmers was committing suicide in the thousands because they couldn't feed their families. So what did he do? He decided to do something about that and to bring back some to protect the soil, to make it better again, to bring the level of the river up again. And he used different methods. You can take a look at his website, how he did it. And that is how the Safe Soil campaign as well. That is a follower of that particular initiative. And in Germany now, for example, or in Europe, it's not a catastrophe yet, but it is definitely in danger. And from a climate perspective, it isn't great. So we would want to increase the organic content in the soil. And it is in the northern countries, it is in moors and in woodlands is the most important areas. Sorry, I'm simultaneously translating while I'm talking here. And there's a in the agricultural areas, 23 to 44% are a high risk at this point, which is quite alarming, right? So this is what Ibrahim Theo, I don't know how you pronounce his name, I've never heard of, the Undersecretary General and Executive Secretary of the United Nations, said in he's of the UN Convention to Combat Desertification. Up to 40% of the Earth's land is now degraded. The UN leader explains how to restore it, and the process by which fertile land becomes barren is, of course, human activities from deforestation, agricultural practices like overgrazing, urban expansion, and industrial activities such as mining. So those need to be addressed, of course. Um, and the world will be needing to produce up to 70% more food by 2050. And we estimate or they estimate in the UN Convention to Combat Desertification that they need to restore 1.5 billion hectares of land by 2030. That's a huge task, but not impossible, but it requires a new industry and new technologies and old technologies. So bringing small farmers and large landholders together, bringing the public and the private sector together in order to achieve that. Um, Going back here. So 1.5 billion hectares, that's a huge amount of land, obviously, but it is not achievable. It is achievable still, but it needs to be addressed. So people can't just put their head in the sand and pretend that it's not happening. No, of course, the problem is a lot of times when you say these things, people have either heard them so many times before that they don't believe it anymore, or they, just don't want to hear it anymore, or they get so scared that they don't want to hear it, so they run to the people who tell them, oh no, climate change is a hoax, we don't have climate change. Yeah, I mean, look around. Of course, we have climate change, but that doesn't mean that you have to put your head in the sand or think that we're dying tomorrow. It just means we have to look at what we have right now, look where we want to go, and do what we need to do to get there. That is what every business does. That's what every business leader does. You don't put your head in the sand if you see a problem and pretend that it's not there, but you take a look at where you want to land and then you take a look at how to get there. That is what we have to do right now as a society, as a planet, basically. So some of the old technologies, of course, include sustainable farming practices such as agroforestry and rotational grazing, which is something that even I learned at school already, although I had nothing to do with farming. Alongside with soil conservation, wastewater reuse, and precise irrigation, which we have new technology for that even uses stuff like AI and all kinds of things. And innovations are a key piece of the puzzle. From drought resistant seeds to digital farming systems and as I said, AI. And we need drones, for example. I've already seen drones used in places where they seeded woods, for example, where people could hardly get to because they were somewhere in the mountains and stuff and it was hard to get to. So they sent drones and they seeded the forest. I think they did it in the Amazon as well. The great thing about it will create a lot of jobs in the green space that also have access to high tech and new technologies, which means it's not that boring. It's not boring, repetitive tasks anymore, but it can even be creative if you find a new solution. The public sector is doing quite good over the last few years in trying to restore degraded lands. The private sector is still lagging behind. Why should the private sector care if they just want to make money now? Well, land restoration doesn't only benefit Earth's food systems, i.e., the food they also eat. But it also forms the basis on which businesses can remain profitable. We know that 50% of the GDP is coming from natural resources. I'm assuming that he means the world GDP, which means 50% of the profit they are making is coming from natural resources, from land, from biodiversity, and from nature. So it would be good for humanity to restore the land as well, because that is where the 50% of the economy comes from. It's not just our food, it's not just our livelihoods, it's not just our life that comes from there, which should be enough. It's also the money that comes from there, 50% of the money. So just to make that very, very clear, and even in banks, for example, there's a thing called commodities trading. You have to have commodities in order to trade them. If you don't have commodities anymore, you can't trade them anymore. If you don't have grain, you can't have futures on grain. Right? It's very easy, and banks and insurances know that as well. That is why the ECB was one of the first ones to look at this kind of thing, because of course they have to put it into their models, because if something goes wrong, they have to be covered. I mean, how much alone from the fires in Los Angeles, how much do you think the insurances have to pay on that? They have to pay every time when a flood destroys everything again. In Germany, for example, when there was the flood, and I mean, insurances can go down because of that. Of course, they have to already price this into the models, not sometime in the future. You're already paying for this, right? So, key issues, these sources, the sources that this is talking about is, I looked after I did this presentation, because I was doing this presentation to get somebody on board, because we here want to do something like Sadhguru did, just on a local level, to make people more aware of this issue. And there's funding by the EU now, because they are also aware of this. And we are looking to get a piece of this funding pot with a local municipality that is very much involved in tourism, and a local farming community. And we want to make this, because this pot is also linked to artistic expression. And Sadhguru gave us such really great ideas how to do this, with including dance and, all kinds of interesting, music. And of course, he had some Hollywood people and some very famous people singing for him and producing songs for him and everything. We don't have that necessarily, but we want to do this as well locally. And since we are in a touristy area, the tourists who are coming here, the municipality is really excited about this. They already have a campaign to protect the soil, funny enough, which also makes the town more beautiful. And they want to include it as well, and then the tourists can spread it out in the world as well. So this is really exciting. This is what we are doing. But key issues that, while I was doing research, the 10 top documents show, and I must rely on ChatGPT here, because the first document alone was 600 pages, which is from the United Nations, and the second document was 700 pages. I'm looking at what ChatGPT showed me here. Such a great resource nowadays, AI, to do this kind of analysis. Climate regulation, carbon soils are the largest terrestrial carbon pool. Loss of soil organic carbon releases CO2 and reduces buffering capacity. Restoring soil organic matter both mitigates emissions and increases climate resilience. Those sources I will show at the end in the slides. Food security and geopolitics. Soil degradation reduces yields and nutritional quality. Large-scale degradation, erosion, salinization can shrink productive area, driving local food shortages, price shocks, and cross-border tensions. But because, of course, if people don't have anything to eat, there's going to be war, right? IPBES and FAO link land degradation to increased vulnerability and migration risk, because people will move somewhere else where there's food. Nutrition, vitamin decline in food. I just talked about this. Longitudinal studies showed declines in mineral concentrations, iron, zinc, etc., in crop that can be associated with intensive cropping and soil nutrient depletion, with public health effects. Of course, that will affect our health, right? Pesticides and soil function, and pesticides use damages. Pesticide use damages non-target soil fauna and microbes that drive nutrient recycling, cycling and soil structure, worsening fertility over time, which is the same thing as an alcoholic, basically. If you use a lot of pesticides and a lot of um, other things that are not good for the soil, it feels good at the time. It seems to do something great, but the more of it you use, the worse it gets. And at the end, you end up either really cruel and a monster, or you end up like a vegetable. Well, yeah. You don't want to do that to the nutrition supply of the entire humanity. So there's a reason why pesticides are banned in some areas, and why we should reduce pesticides. It's not to harm farmers, it's actually to save their livelihood, because they're destroying it while they think that they have to use more of it. And of course, there are chemical industries and chemical companies who will want to sell more of that. But we also have tobacco companies who want to sell more of their cigarettes, which are also killing people. So, anyway, salinity contamination, erosion, and biodiversity loss. Salination already affects large areas, and erosion contamination are widespread threats, reducing arable land and ecosystem services. So the citations we have at the back, as said, there are ways to combat that are actually quite nice. My favorite example, of course, is Suntory, and I've used that several times already. Suntory bought nature reserves and woodlands 20 years ago already and protected them. Why? Because they need the groundwater. They protected the groundwater with it. But of course, humans still benefit from having these woodlands and nature reserves. The air is better, and the local newt doesn't care. It's just happy that it just still has its pond to thrive in, right? So everybody wins. And the counter example was Coca-Cola, as we've said a few times already, who reported a $1 billion potential loss in to CPD in 2022, which they now not have on their website anymore. But at the time we downloaded it, now they have on their website the 2023 report for 2022, but we still downloaded it. It was public information at the time. So, what did the United Nations do? They've got a World Economic Forum's 100 Million Farmer Initiative to promote the transition to regenerative, climate smart agriculture. The 1T.org platform, which is part of the Trillion Trees Initiative, which aims to conserve and restore and grow a trillion trees by 2030. And as said, recalling, I'm not entirely sure how you pronounce that, and Save Soil from Sadhguru is a great inspiration in all kinds of ways for us. And we are doing this creative project again. So these are the sources that I talked about that you can take a look at. In the first two are combined about 1,500 pages. The others are a little bit less, but it is a lot to explore, and we will explore probably quite a few of them in future, just to be prepared for our little project. So we will share that here. So this is what we had this week. I hope I see you next week, and maybe I will see you this week at the Frankfurt Book Fair, and I would love to. So we are at American Publishers Inc. in, I think it's D29, I think. So maybe see you there.